What would you sacrifice to stop a man you'd never seen? 2018. A Mossad analyst sat in a windowless room in Tel Aviv, staring at a photograph that didn't exist 6 months earlier. The image was grainy, taken from a satellite passing over Gaza at precisely 11:47 a.m. on a Thursday. It showed a figure entering a building that officially didn't house any Hamas operations. The analyst had been tracking patterns for 3 years: cellular signals that appeared and vanished, financial transactions routed through 7 countries, encrypted messages that followed the lunar calendar. Everyone said the target was a ghost. But ghosts don't have patterns. And after 247 days, the patterns were finally becoming clear. This is the story of how Israeli intelligence tracked a man who orchestrated attacks across 3 continents while never appearing in a single confirmed photograph, who communicated through methods that predated the internet and whose capture would require methods that blurred every line between legal and necessary. Before we reveal how Mossad found him, you need to understand why this particular strategist terrified Israeli intelligence more than any Hamas military commander ever had. If this exploration of how intelligence agencies track invisible enemies engages you, hit that like button and subscribe. Your support allows us to continue uncovering these hidden chapters of modern intelligence warfare. Capitulo 1. Ohomim Sem Rostu. The file that landed on Mossad's desk in late 2015 contained a troubling pattern. 7 attacks across 4 years, each one surgically precise, each one revealing operational knowledge that should have been impossible for Hamas to possess. A bus bombing in Jerusalem that occurred exactly when a planned security sweep had been postponed. A tunnel discovered 3 days after its completion, as if someone knew the exact moment detection became inevitable. A kidnapping attempt that targeted an off-duty soldier whose weekend plans had changed only hours earlier. Israeli intelligence calls this operational prescience, when an adversary demonstrates knowledge they shouldn't possess. It means either a catastrophic security breach or a strategic mind capable of predicting Israeli responses with uncomfortable accuracy. The investigation focused on the latter possibility. Somewhere in Hamas's labyrinthine command structure, someone understood how Israeli security services thought, how they allocated resources, how they made decisions under pressure. Someone who could stay 3 moves ahead. The first solid lead emerged from an interrogation in 2016. A captured Hamas operative facing decades in Israeli prison mentioned a figure called Al-Muhandis Al-Thani, the second engineer, not the original engineer Yahya Ayash, whom Israel had assassinated in 1996 with an exploding cell phone. This was someone different, someone who designed operations instead of bombs. Someone whose plans were so carefully constructed that even operatives executing them didn't understand the complete picture until everything unfolded. Mossad's research division began reconstructing the second engineer's operational history. They identified his signature, attacks that appeared improvised but revealed, upon analysis, months of preparation. Operations with multiple contingency plans built into their structure. Tactics that exploited not Israeli weaknesses but Israeli strengths turned against themselves. He understood that Israeli security services were sophisticated, well-funded, technologically superior, so he designed operations where those advantages became liabilities. The bus bombing investigation revealed his methodology. Israeli security had implemented new screening protocols at central bus stations, forcing Hamas to adapt. Most organizations would have abandoned bus attacks or attempted crude workarounds. The second engineer instead studied the new protocols for 6 months, identifying not weaknesses in the security itself, but in how security forces reallocated resources to implement it. He determined that enhanced screening at major stations meant reduced surveillance at minor stops. He calculated optimal times when screeners' attention degraded due to fatigue. He planned an attack for a Tuesday afternoon at a suburban station where 3 security factors intersected: minimal screening, shift change timing, and a route serving military bases where soldiers traveled in uniform, making target identification simple. The attack killed 4 soldiers and 11 civilians. What haunted Israeli intelligence wasn't the casualties, tragic as they were, but the sophistication. This wasn't terrorism as emotional expression or religious fervor. This was terrorism as strategic calculation, executed by someone who understood systems theory and operational psychology. Mossad assembled a task force designated Nachshon, after the biblical figure who first entered the Red Sea. The mandate was finding someone who existed only through his effects on the world, like detecting dark matter through gravitational influence on visible objects. They couldn't find the man directly, so they would map the gravity well his operations created and work backward to locate the source. The task force began with biography reconstruction, building a profile from operational patterns. The second engineer's tactics suggested formal education, possibly engineering or systems analysis. His timing indicated someone with military experience who understood operational tempo. His communications discipline suggested training in counterintelligence tradecraft, and his longevity meant he possessed unusual patience, willing to wait months or years for optimal operational windows. They estimated his age at 40 to 55, old enough for extensive experience, but young enough for the cognitive flexibility his adaptive tactics required. They theorized he had spent time outside Gaza, possibly studying abroad before Israel's 2007 blockade made exit nearly impossible. And they suspected he maintained minimal electronic footprint, communicating through methods resistant to signals intelligence, couriers, dead drops, or coded messages hidden in legitimate communications. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: financial intelligence. Mossad's economic warfare division tracked Hamas funding flows, mapping how money moved from Qatar and Iran through Turkish banks, Egyptian smugglers, and cryptocurrency exchanges into Gaza. Most transactions were obvious: weapons purchases, tunnel construction, operative salaries, but analysts identified a separate pattern: small recurring payments to accounts in Gaza that didn't correlate with known Hamas activities. The payments averaged $3,000 monthly, distributed among 17 accounts belonging to families with no obvious Hamas connections. Too small for weapons procurement, too regular for smuggling operations. The pattern suggested stipends, regular payments supporting dependents. Following the money backward through 6 jurisdictions, analysts traced payments to a foundation in Istanbul claiming to support Palestinian students. The foundation was legitimate, funding dozens of genuine scholarships. But embedded within those transactions were payments earmarked for specific families whose circumstances shared common features. Male family member disappeared from public life years earlier. Families maintained comfortable but not lavish lifestyles, and children attended private schools despite parents holding ordinary jobs. 17 families, 17 missing men who could be dead, imprisoned, or living covertly. Cross-referencing with Hamas defector testimony and captured documents, Mossad identified 12 of the 17 missing men. Most were confirmed killed in Israeli operations or internal Hamas purges. 3 were imprisoned. 2 remained unaccounted for, their families receiving payments suggesting someone wanted their dependents cared for while they remained unavailable. One of those 2 families lived in Khan Yunis. The missing man was Omar Mansour, aged 47, last seen publicly in 2011. His background matched the profile perfectly: engineering degree from Cairo University in the 1990s, brief employment with Palestinian Authority before Hamas's 2007 takeover, then vanishment coinciding with the emergence of the sophisticated operational pattern Mossad had been tracking. They had a name: Now they needed to find the ghost behind it. Capítulo 2. A arte da invisibilidade. Finding Omar Mansour proved vastly more difficult than identifying him. Gaza's 365 square kilometers contained 2 million people living in one of Earth's most densely populated territories. Israeli surveillance covered the strip comprehensively. Satellites, drones, signals intelligence, human sources. Yet Mansour remained invisible, which meant his invisibility was systematic rather than fortunate. Mossad's behavioral analysis unit studied how people disappear in plain sight. The challenge isn't avoiding surveillance once, it's maintaining operational security indefinitely while remaining effective. Most fugitives eventually make mistakes, establishing patterns that sophisticated surveillance detects. But Mansour had maintained his vanishing act for 7 years, suggesting discipline that exceeded normal human capacity or support infrastructure enabling his invisibility. The task force hypothesized Mansour lived openly but under assumed identity, or lived covertly with elaborate support network. The first theory seemed unlikely. Gaza's tight-knit society made maintaining false identity extremely difficult when neighbors knew everyone's family history. The second theory implied Hamas devoted substantial resources to keeping Mansour hidden, suggesting his value exceeded typical operational commanders. Israeli intelligence possesses comprehensive biometric database of Gaza residents, facial recognition profiles, fingerprints, retinal scans collected at checkpoints and border crossings. Mansour's data was current through 2011, before his disappearance. Mossad initiated negative recognition protocol, systematically analyzing surveillance footage not for Mansour's presence, but for unexplained gaps in population tracking. In a territory where everyone was documented, someone generating no data was conspicuous through absence. The analysis took 8 months, processing millions of hours of surveillance footage through algorithmic filters, identifying anomalies. The system flagged 17 locations where patterns suggested concealed occupancy, buildings showing utility consumption inconsistent with documented residents, structures where thermal imaging revealed human presence unaccounted for in population databases, facilities receiving deliveries exceeding documented inhabitants' needs. Mossad prioritized investigation of a compound in central Gaza City. The building officially housed a textile import business on ground floor and residential apartments above. But analysis revealed discrepancies. Electrical consumption 3 times higher than similar buildings, deliveries from medical supply companies inappropriate for textile business, and thermal signatures suggesting basement spaces not reflected in building plans. Human intelligence proved crucial. Israel maintains network of Palestinian informants motivated by various factors: money, ideology, personal grudges, coercion. Recruiting sources in Gaza is extraordinarily difficult. Hamas's internal security services execute suspected collaborators publicly, creating powerful deterrent. But some Palestinians, for reasons known only to themselves, choose cooperation. A source codenamed Yarrow had provided reliable intelligence for 4 years. Motivated by brother's death in Hamas custody after accusations of collaboration that Yarrow insisted were false, revenge drove him, and grief made him useful. Mossad tasked Yarrow with investigating the textile company, providing cover story about potential business opportunity. Yarrow's report confirmed suspicions. The textile business was legitimate but barely profitable. The owner was cousin to senior Hamas official, and deliveries included medical equipment unusual for residential building. Oxygen concentrators, specialized medications, supplies suggesting someone required ongoing medical care. Hamas taking extraordinary measures to hide someone implied that person's value justified the risk. And someone requiring medical support would be increasingly difficult to conceal. Mossad developed operational plan designated Patience, ironic name for operation tracking someone whose defining characteristic was patience. The plan involved persistent surveillance, establishing Mansour's patterns without forcing premature action. Israeli intelligence had learned from past operations that precipitous action against high-value targets often resulted in targets escaping or intelligence opportunities lost. Better to watch, document, and strike when operational conditions guaranteed success. The surveillance revealed Mansour's security protocols. He never left the building. Communications occurred through couriers visiting the textile shop, carrying messages concealed in business documents. Medical care came from doctor, who visited weekly, apparently treating building owner's elderly mother who required ongoing care. And Mansour maintained irregular schedule, visible through thermal imaging, moving between rooms at unpredictable times, making drone strikes impossible without unacceptable civilian casualties. His invisibility wasn't accident, it was architecture. Hamas had constructed comprehensive operational security around Mansour, recognizing his value exceeded any single attack he might plan. He was institutional knowledge, strategic vision, operational memory. As long as he remained alive and hidden, he could continue designing operations that maximized Israeli casualties while minimizing Hamas operational exposure. But the medical deliveries revealed vulnerability. Someone requiring ongoing medical care faces mortality that no operational security can defeat. Intelligence analysis of equipment deliveries suggested respiratory condition, possibly chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or similar progressive illness. The condition wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it was degenerative, meaning Mansour's effectiveness would eventually decline. This created strategic calculation for Israeli planners. Strike now while Mansour's location was confirmed, but risk civilian casualties and international condemnation, or continue surveillance, hoping for cleaner operational opportunity that might never come. The debate divided Mossad leadership between those advocating immediate action and those counseling patience. The decision was postponed when events intervened. May 2018 brought renewed conflict between Israel and Hamas, triggered by protests along Gaza border fence that escalated into rocket exchanges. During 11 days of fighting, Israeli aircraft struck dozens of Hamas facilities across Gaza. The textile building wasn't targeted. Mossad wanted Mansour alive for interrogation if possible, dead if necessary, but either outcome required confirmation the crude airstrike couldn't guarantee. When fighting ended, surveillance confirmed Mansour survived. But the operation revealed something unexpected. During the conflict, when most Hamas commanders hid in tunnels fearing Israeli assassination strikes, Mansour remained in his building, visible through thermal imaging, maintaining his regular routine. The behavior seemed suicidal until analysts understood its logic. Mansour had calculated that Israeli intelligence, if they knew his location, would want him alive for interrogation. His strategic knowledge was too valuable to destroy with bombs that might kill him while leaving his plans unknown. Therefore, as long as his location remained uncertain, he was safest during conflicts when Israel struck targets freely. The logic was perverse but sound. His value as intelligence target protected him during periods when other Hamas commanders were most vulnerable. This insight changed Mossad's operational approach. They couldn't kill Mansour with acceptable certainty, and they couldn't capture him without substantial ground operation in Gaza that political leadership wouldn't authorize. Therefore, they needed to force him out of his sanctuary into circumstances where capture became feasible. They needed to make the building that protected him become the trap that caught him. The plan that emerged would require patience matching Mansour's own, manipulation of circumstances that would take years to develop, and willingness to let operations continue while preparing conditions for capture. Not every intelligence operation succeeds through direct action. Sometimes victory requires making your adversary believe they're winning until they've actually positioned themselves for defeat. Capítulo 3. O Jogo Invisível. The strategy Mossad developed was called attrition amplification, a doctrine that sounds bureaucratic but represents sophisticated psychological warfare. Rather than attacking Mansour directly, they would manipulate the environment around him, gradually making his position untenable through accumulated pressures that appeared unrelated to his specific situation. The approach began with medical intelligence. Mossad's medical team analyzed equipment deliveries and developed profile of Mansour's condition. The respiratory disease required specific medications, oxygen supplementation, and regular monitoring. But Gaza's medical supply chains were fragile, dependent on imports through Israeli-controlled crossings and Egyptian border. Israel couldn't target Mansour's medical supplies specifically without revealing they knew his location. But they could create general shortages affecting many patients, while particularly impacting him. Starting late 2018, Israeli authorities tightened restrictions on medical equipment entering Gaza, citing security concerns about dual-use technologies. The restrictions weren't arbitrary harassment but carefully calibrated economic warfare. Oxygen concentrators, respiratory medications, specialized diagnostic equipment all faced enhanced screening, causing delays. The delays created shortages affecting thousands of Gaza patients, providing humanitarian cover for operation specifically targeting one man's medical needs. Human rights organizations condemned the restrictions as collective punishment. International pressure mounted. Israel maintained the restrictions were security necessities, citing incidents where Hamas used medical equipment for military purposes. The controversy created exactly the confusion Mossad intended: genuine humanitarian concern obscuring targeted intelligence operation. For Mansour, the shortages created dilemma. His condition required consistent medical care that scarcity made increasingly difficult. Hamas could divert supplies, ensuring Mansour received necessary treatment. But doing so required revealing his location's importance to internal logistics networks that Israeli intelligence penetrated. Alternatively, Hamas could maintain operational security while Mansour's health deteriorated. Either choice served Israeli interests. Simultaneously, Mossad initiated financial pressure targeting Hamas's payment networks. Israeli intelligence had mapped how money flowed to families of Hamas operatives, including Mansour's family receiving their monthly stipend. Rather than stopping payments to Mansour's family specifically, Israel disrupted entire payment networks through coordinated actions with American and European financial institutions. The campaign froze accounts, blocked transfers, and designated intermediary organizations as terror-supporting entities. Dozens of families found monthly payments stopped, creating humanitarian crises for Hamas operatives' dependents. Hamas faced choice: reconstitute payment networks quickly but carelessly, making them vulnerable to further intelligence penetration, or rebuild slowly and carefully while families suffered. The pressure worked both directions. Families struggling financially created problems for Hamas operatives who worried about dependents' welfare. And Hamas's responses to financial pressure revealed information about organizational structure. Who got paid first when resources were scarce indicated organizational priorities. Which families received alternative support revealed hidden connections, and how quickly payments resumed showed network resilience. Mossad also exploited information operations, planting stories suggesting Israeli intelligence had penetrated Hamas command structure more deeply than actually true. Israeli media, fed by intelligence sources, published reports about Hamas commanders exposed through financial tracking, communications intercepts, and compromised couriers. The reports were accurate enough to be credible, vague enough to maximize paranoia. For Hamas, the uncertainty was toxic. Their security services investigated suspected collaborators, creating an atmosphere of suspicion that degraded operational effectiveness. Commanders became cautious about communications, slowing decision-making, and valuable operatives were imprisoned or executed based on suspicions that Israeli intelligence deliberately cultivated, forcing Hamas to do Israel's work, eliminating its own personnel. But the campaign's psychological centerpiece targeted Mansour specifically through method only he would recognize. Mossad analyzed his operational signatures and began designing fake operations mimicking his style. Israeli intelligence created false intelligence suggesting Hamas was planning attacks matching Mansour's methodology. Sophisticated, carefully timed, exploiting Israeli security protocols through systematic analysis. Then Israel discovered and disrupted these fabricated plots through highly publicized operations. The disruptions appeared to result from intelligence breakthroughs, captured couriers, intercepted communications, informant reports. The message was clear. Mansour's operational security had been compromised. His planning methods were exposed. His effectiveness was finished. The psychological impact was precisely calibrated. Mansour would recognize the disrupted operations as matching his style, suggesting Israeli intelligence understood his methodology intimately. He would question how Israel acquired such detailed knowledge. Was their informant close to him? Had communications been compromised? Were his couriers reliable? The uncertainty would be corrosive, making him question every aspect of operational security that kept him alive. Hamas leadership would face similar questions. If Mansour's operations were compromised, was he still valuable enough to justify resources devoted to hiding him? If Israeli intelligence understood his methods, could those methods still succeed? And if keeping Mansour hidden required diverting scarce medical supplies and organizational resources, was his continued existence worth the cost? The campaign's genius was its ambiguity. Israeli intelligence didn't know whether their psychological operations were succeeding. They could only create conditions and wait for responses. Mansour might recognize the operations as fabrications, seeing through the deception. Hamas might increase security around Mansour rather than questioning his value. And the disrupted fake plots might convince Israeli political leadership that Mansour's threat was neutralized, making eventual capture operation politically harder to justify. Intelligence work requires accepting uncertainty, making calculated moves based on incomplete information, and waiting to see whether reality validates your theories. Mossad had created comprehensive pressure campaign targeting Mansour's medical needs, financial security, and psychological confidence. Now they needed patience for pressure to work. The waiting was complicated by attacks that continued despite pressure campaign. Mansour, if he was still operational, kept designing attacks even as his circumstances deteriorated. Or perhaps other Hamas planners had learned his methods and continued operations without him. Or maybe attacks attributed to Mansour's signature were coincidental, reflecting operational convergence where different planners independently developed similar tactics. Intelligence analysis rarely provides certainty. Analysts build cases from fragmentary evidence, circumstantial correlations, and informed speculation. They're right more often than chance would predict, but wrong frequently enough to maintain humility. The Mansour operation exemplified these limitations. Comprehensive intelligence campaign targeting a man whose existence remained unconfirmed, whose location was probable but not certain, whose influence on Hamas operations was significant but perhaps not decisive. By mid-2019, Mossad's assessment was that pressure campaign had achieved partial success. Medical intelligence suggested Mansour's health had deteriorated significantly. Financial tracking indicated Hamas reduced payments to his family, suggesting organizational support was weakening. And Hamas's operational tempo had slowed, possibly reflecting Mansour's reduced effectiveness or heightened security concerns limiting his communications. But assessment also concluded Mansour remained in the textile building, still alive, still potentially dangerous. The pressure campaign hadn't forced him into circumstances permitting capture. It had only made his situation more difficult, which was progress, but not victory. Mossad needed catalyst, something forcing immediate change that pressure campaign alone couldn't achieve. They needed crisis, compelling Hamas to move Mansour from his sanctuary, creating operational opportunity that patience alone wouldn't generate. Sometimes intelligence operations require fortune as much as skill, and sometimes you create your own fortune through strategies that look like failures until they suddenly become victories. Capítulo 4. O Colapso de Sombra. The opportunity came from COVID-19, though not in ways anyone anticipated. When the pandemic reached Gaza in early 2020, it created public health crisis in territory already devastated by blockade and previous conflicts. Medical infrastructure was inadequate for routine care, let alone pandemic response. Hospitals lacked equipment, medication shortages were chronic, and isolation facilities were non-existent. For someone with compromised respiratory system like Mansour, COVID-19 represented existential threat. His underlying condition made him extraordinarily vulnerable to virus whose primary danger was respiratory failure. Hamas faced grim calculation: maintain operational security and let Mansour risk infection in building with limited protection, or move him to medical facility with better isolation protocols but greater exposure to surveillance. Mossad recognized the opportunity immediately. Intelligence analysis predicted Hamas would eventually need to move Mansour for medical treatment, and pandemic provided justification that wouldn't reveal his identity. Gaza's overwhelmed medical system meant many patients received care in improvised facilities, temporary clinics, even private homes converted for isolation. Mansour could be moved under cover of pandemic response without obviously signaling his importance. Israeli intelligence intensified surveillance of medical facilities across Gaza, particularly those with capabilities for treating respiratory conditions. They monitored ambulance movements, tracked medical personnel travel patterns, analyzed communications for references to high-value patients requiring special protocols, and they waited for Hamas to make mistake that 7 years of operational discipline hadn't produced. The mistake came in August 2020. Israeli signals intelligence intercepted fragment of communication between Hamas officials discussing special patient requiring transfer to secure medical facility with specific capabilities. The communication was encrypted but incompletely, suggesting urgency overrode normal security protocols. Cross-referencing the conversation with surveillance data, Mossad identified 3 possible facilities matching requirements. One facility was private clinic in Gaza City, operated by a doctor who had previously visited the textile building monthly. The connection wasn't definitive, but probability analysis suggested this was most likely destination. Mossad intensified surveillance, positioning assets for potential operation. The transfer occurred at 3:47 a.m. on August 18, 2020. Thermal imaging detected unusual activity at textile building, multiple figures moving, vehicle arriving at rear entrance. The vehicle was civilian ambulance, unmarked, driver and single attendant. Patient was loaded on stretcher, covered completely, transported to private clinic 7 minutes away. Israeli intelligence faced immediate decision. Act now with substantial uncertainty about patient identity, or continue surveillance confirming identity but risking Mansour being moved again. The decision point exemplified intelligence work's fundamental tension between acting on incomplete information versus waiting for certainty that might arrive too late. Mossad's director authorized immediate operation. Even if patient wasn't Mansour, Hamas's extraordinary security measures suggested high-value target whose capture would benefit Israeli intelligence. And opportunity for ground operation in Gaza was fleeting. Hamas would rapidly enhance security once transfer was complete. The operation, designated Final Patience, launched within 90 minutes. Israeli special forces maintained readiness for rapid Gaza operations. Positioned just outside territory with helicopters, armored vehicles, and mission packages for various contingencies. This mission was snatch and grab, extracting high-value target from denied territory with minimal combat and maximum speed. The operational plan was elegant and brutal. Israeli aircraft would strike Hamas facilities across Gaza simultaneously, creating confusion, suggesting major military operation. During the chaos, special forces would insert via helicopter, assault the clinic, secure target, and extract before Hamas could organize response. The entire operation would take less than 15 minutes from insertion to extraction. At 5:23 a.m., Israeli aircraft struck 12 Hamas facilities in coordinated attacks. As air raid sirens wailed and Hamas operatives scrambled to defensive positions, 4 helicopters crossed into Gaza at low altitude, flying nap of the earth to avoid detection. 2 helicopters provided aerial security, while 2 landed in the clinic courtyard. 12 operators assaulted the building. Resistance was minimal. The clinic had guards, but they were overwhelmed before raising alarm. The operators secured 3 floors in 4 minutes, finding patient in second-floor room, attended by 2 medical staff and single-armed guard. The guard was neutralized non-lethally, staff were restrained, patient was secured on stretcher and loaded onto helicopter. From insertion to extraction, 11 minutes, 34 seconds. No Israeli casualties, minimal Palestinian casualties. Target secured. The helicopters crossed back into Israeli territory as dawn broke over Gaza, landing at undisclosed facility where medical teams waited to evaluate and stabilize the captured patient. Initial identification was complicated by patient's condition. He was elderly, weakened by illness, heavily sedated for medical transport. But fingerprints matched database records for Omar Mansour. Facial recognition, accounting for 7 years of aging and illness, confirmed identity with 93% confidence. They had him. Mansour's interrogation began once his medical condition stabilized. He was cooperative, though whether from recognition that resistance was futile or from calculation that cooperation might earn better treatment, remained ambiguous. His debriefing revealed operational details that had eluded Israeli intelligence for years. Hamas's command structure, planning methodologies, ongoing operations, and future strategic intentions. But his most valuable contribution was explaining his longevity. How had he remained hidden for 7 years in one of Earth's most surveilled territories? The answer combined sophisticated tradecraft, Hamas organizational support, personal discipline, and luck. He had lived in single building for 7 years, never leaving, never directly communicating electronically, maintaining rigid operational security that bordered on imprisonment. His life was isolation, illness, and continuous fear that each day might bring Israeli raid. His capture validated Mossad's long campaign, but also revealed intelligence operations limitations. Years of surveillance, pressure campaigns, and sophisticated tracking had located but couldn't capture him until medical crisis forced Hamas's hand. Intelligence services are powerful, but not omnipotent. Their capabilities depend on adversaries making mistakes, circumstances creating opportunities, and operational patience outlasting targets' discipline. For Israeli security establishment, Mansour's capture represented significant victory. His interrogation provided intelligence advantage that would degrade Hamas operations for years. His removal eliminated strategic mind behind sophisticated attacks, and the operation demonstrated Israeli capability to reach targets even in hostile territory under extremely difficult circumstances. But victory was complicated by questions the operation raised. Mansour's family remained in Gaza, now knowing Israeli intelligence had tracked them for years. The medical restrictions that pressured Mansour had caused suffering for thousands of innocent patients, and the disruption campaigns that created uncertainty within Hamas had resulted in Palestinian deaths through internal purges. Intelligence operations serving national security objectives create moral complexities that don't resolve cleanly. Protecting Israeli civilians from attacks required operations that caused harm to Palestinian civilians. Capturing one dangerous individual required systematic pressure, affecting thousands, and validating years of intelligence work required extraordinary operation that could have failed catastrophically. Omar Mansour died in Israeli custody 18 months after capture, his respiratory condition ultimately fatal despite medical care. His interrogation provided material for hundreds of intelligence reports, shaped Israeli security policy, and informed operations disrupting Hamas activities. But his death also meant questions about his operations, his motivations, and his strategic vision would remain partially unanswered, taken to grave by man who spent final years as prisoner after spending previous 7 years as self-imprisoned ghost. The operation's legacy extended beyond Mansour individually. Israeli intelligence learned lessons about tracking elusive targets, conducting multi-year operations requiring sustained organizational commitment and balancing direct action against indirect pressure campaigns. Hamas learned lessons about operational security limitations, medical vulnerabilities, creating exploitable circumstances, and costs of protecting high-value individuals in resource-constrained environment. But perhaps most importantly, the operation demonstrated principles central to intelligence work. Patience and systematic pressure often succeed where dramatic action fails. Finding Mansour required 7 years of incremental progress, analytical persistence, and willingness to wait for circumstances, creating opportunity. His capture wasn't spectacular raid planned for cinematic impact, but culmination of patient campaign, creating conditions where his enemy's discipline finally exceeded his own organization's ability to protect him. Intelligence work rarely provides satisfying conclusions, clear victories, or simple narratives. Instead, it offers ambiguous successes, ongoing operations that blur into each other, and victories that create new challenges. The Mansour operation achieved its objectives, but also revealed how much Israeli intelligence still doesn't know about Hamas, how many threats remain unaddressed, and how uncertain the next intelligence challenge might be. In windowless room in Tel Aviv, analysts continue studying patterns, tracking signals, mapping networks. Somewhere in Gaza, another strategic mind might be developing operations that will challenge Israeli security. And intelligence officers who spent years finding Mansour already begin tracking the next ghost, knowing the work never ends and the victories never last. What strikes you most about this operation? The patience required to track someone for 7 years? The ethical complications of pressure campaigns affecting thousands to capture one? Or the vulnerability that medical crisis created, even for someone who maintained perfect operational security? Indeed, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this exploration of how intelligence agencies track invisible enemies through years of patient work engaged you, hit that like button and subscribe. Your support allows us to continue uncovering these hidden chapters of modern intelligence warfare, the operations conducted in shadows, the strategies that unfold over years, and the complex reality of security operations that achieve objectives while raising questions about methods and costs.